What we want to do with Radical Orthodoxy is carve out space for faithful progress, for faithful change.
A couple of weeks ago, a few popular LDS bloggers posted a document they called Radical Orthodoxy A Manifesto. This document caused quite a stir in the online LDS community with a flurry of polarized and heated comments. It was also written up in the Salt Lake Tribune. Essentially, the document seeks to navigate a middle ground approach to the church and the gospel in a politically charged and polarized, well, especially United States, where political ideologies are quickly seeping into the church and causing the same polarization. The manifesto invites us to avoid the dangers of fundamentalism on the right and unbridled progressivism on the left. This interview includes all three authors and provides an intelligent view of the current circumstances we find ourselves in, as well as a practical approach to a way forward. Enjoy. All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm really glad we've got all of you here. We've got J. Max Wilson, we've got Jeffrey Thayne, and we have got Nathaniel Givens here. The three of you have written what has kind of exploded a little bit in the Mormon blogosphere, if you will, online. Radical Orthodoxy, a Manifesto. What I'd like to do before we dip into this is if each of you would just give a little bit of a background on who you are, why you're writing this, and what brought you to this point. Let's go ahead and start with J. Max. Will you go ahead and just, why are you involved with this, and what do you do?
That's a long story, and we'll try to keep it short. But
keep it short.
But I started blogging on Latter-day Saint topics back in 2004, when blogs were new, and the Bloggernacle, which was the Mormon blogging group, was new, and blogged for a while there, and I disassociated myself with the official LDS blogging community back in 2005. I felt like it was headed in the wrong direction, and it was cultivating a lot of ideas that I thought I didn't want to be part of. But I continued to blog on those concepts, and over the last 15 years, I've been writing about LDS topics, Latter-day Saint topics, and through my writing and interacting with various people, that's how I met both Jeffrey and Nathaniel.
Okay. And you primarily blog is it 16 Small Stones or?
Yes, that's my blog, 16smallstones.org.
Okay, great. Jeffrey.
Yeah, so my name is Jeffrey Thayne. I actually started blogging way back in 2007 or 2008. I'm actually not entirely sure which year I started it, but I started the blog Latter-day Saint Philosopher with a friend of mine, Nathan Richardson. And over time, I've had a number of co-authors on the blog, but what was really interesting to me over the years has been exploring the insights that the restored gospel has to offer and an understanding of human nature and psychology. And I'm actually in the process of writing a book with a colleague right now on Latter-day Saint perspectives in psychology. And these sorts of subjects have always got me interested in what the restoration can bring to bear in all of our professional, academic endeavors that we might be sometimes missing out on.
Okay, appreciate that. Nathaniel?
Yeah, so I started blogging about the same time. I've been blogging since 2006 for my first blog. I initially wasn't blogging about kind of Latter-day Saint topics. I was interested in general philosophy, economics, and politics. I didn't really start moving into specifically Latter-day Saint topics until about 2012 when I did my first guest post with Times and Seasons. Since then, I've written for a bunch of different outlets, Real Clear Religion, First Things. I do a lot of writing for Public Square now. I've also got articles at Meridian. I publish blog posts in my own blog, and now also at Nauvoo Neighbors as a new one that we've kind of started as well. So, yeah.
Okay, appreciate that. So the three of you have gotten together now. There's two things I want to focus on here as we start off. One is the manifesto itself, what it says. So we're going to dip into that. But first, I want to know why, right? Why the need to write this?
So I would just start out responding to that by saying that need is a strong word, and that I don't think we're portraying ourselves as indispensable. That's not our role. We think that there's an opportunity to help. We think that there are problems, and we'd like to kind of contribute as we can with our time and our talents. I mean, I think a lot of the problems are pretty obvious in terms of the polarization that's affecting the country in general, and that's starting to affect the Latter-day Saint community as well, especially here in America. And so what we wanted to do was kind of respond to that. And we hope that we're doing so in a way that is following kind of the counsel that we're getting. Especially if you look at the most recent General Conference, there were so many talks about civility, kindness, avoiding contention. And so that's to a great extent what we're hoping we can do with the Radical Orthodoxy Manifesto. And kind of the spirit behind it is that you can't just not contend. Nature abhors a vacuum. You have to actually have something positive that you're working towards to kind of take the place where contention might otherwise, come into your heart or to your interactions. And so we're really trying to inspire and rally people around this idea that, hey, you can have these kind of conventional general conference type, theological convictions and operating within that framework, without any need to question or go against kind of the church on its basic core principles. Even within that paradigm, there's tons of room for creative thinking, for analysis, for new perspectives and fresh ideas that can help us be, united as Latter-day Saints. As we tackle the problems and the questions and the controversies of the day, we can do so in a spirit that's humble and faithful.
I'll add to that. Just say that I kind of see this project as an attempt to say that, to make the claim that it is possible to be thoroughly faithful to the church, thoroughly faithful to the leaders of the church, thoroughly faithful to our Savior Jesus Christ, and yet still resist the tug of the various extremes that are attempting to polarize our communities. I don't necessarily see this project as this attempt to find this perfect middle between these extremes per se. I don't necessarily see this as an exercise in center finding or centrism per se, as so much as it is a call to acknowledge the possibilities of faithfulness, while also heeding the church's teachings about civility and kindness, generosity towards those with different views, and so forth. And ultimately, I also see this as an invitation to explore the ramifications of the restored gospel in every aspect of our lives, to explore the ramifications with maximum integrity to what our leaders are teaching us.
J. Max, what's your point of view?
So I agree with everything that Nathaniel and Jeff have said. I'd like to add, though, that the three of us don't agree on quite a few things. In addition to the things we agree on, we're certainly not monolithic in the way that we approach problem solving, even within the church. And that's part of, I think, what we were trying to communicate, is that there is space within a faithful framework, within the even more of I don't want to call it traditional, but I want to call it the general approach that most believing members of the church take to the gospel. There is a lot of room within that space for a lot of various different approaches, different ways of thinking, different ways of interpreting that are still faithful. And part of what we wanted to accomplish with the manifesto that we wrote was to lay out some ground rules to say, okay, we're going to take these particular teachings of the prophets, the three main proclamations that we've identified, and we're going to take those as something that we're not challenging, that we're not disagreeing with. And then that leaves us free to explore so much else that's getting ignored, because everybody spends so much time on a few very narrow topics when there's so many amazing things in the gospel that are getting neglected. So that was another thing that we wanted to accomplish, is to kind of lay out this realm of possibilities within faithfulness.
And of course, you see the same thing, right, politically in the United States, especially, right? I mean, you have a couple of lightning rod issues that dominate everything from fundraising to activism, right? And so I see the same thing, right? It's the same thing seems to be happening within LDS scholarship, within apologetics. There's just this move. It's funny because not funny, but as I'm going through the Book of Mormon right now, toward the end of it, it's the same type of thing, right? You see this polarization, whether with the Jaredites, right? It comes down to you're going to certainly have different factions, but ultimately you get this massive polarization on two separate sides. And the same thing obviously happens with the Nephites and the Lamanites. And it's not a good road, right? It's not a good road to go down. Radical Orthodoxy, the name, just if you guys could clarify that a little bit, why you came up with it. That seems like a radical name, right? I mean, it's certainly attention grabbing, and I think that's good. But there is some context I think you guys need to put out there. There's Radical Orthodoxy that was brought about by Milbank, right? He talked about that back in the 90s, even from the Anglican Church, and which did focus more on theology, but also had a lot of postmodern undercurrents that were along with it. And so I don't think you guys are associating with that, correct? This is something you guys came up with this name on your own?
Yeah, we came. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. We came up with it on our own, and then it was brought to our awareness after we first started sharing our draft of others that there was actually another movement of the same name. But by that point in time, that ship has sort of sailed for us. We'd already settled on the idea, and we in our conversation we just didn't really feel like we could come up with a different approach, a different name that captured that same central paradox that we were trying to get with the name.
Okay.
I'll add to that we did throw around some other names. We explored various names, even toward, after we were far along into the process of drafting it and had even shown it to a few other people. We discussed possibly changing it, and we always came back to a few things. And one of them was what Jeff mentioned was there's so much effort to avoid paradox, but paradox is a real part of our existence and our experience as human beings. And there's a lot, at least in my opinion, that you can learn from paradox between the pole and the name. I think the name Radical Orthodoxy really reflects that pull from the two sides that we're talking about. And by putting them together, it says, all right, let's see in between these two things, in between the pull, what emerges.
Mm-hmm.
And so Nathaniel and Jeffrey will tell you that I had my qualms about the name on and off throughout the process, but I've come to really be a big advocate for it.
And I'll just add too that I don't necessarily think the name is perfect by any means, because I actually know 2 or 3 individuals who support the ideal, support our project, but declined to sign because they didn't necessarily, they thought the name might convey something like extreme orthodoxy, or they thought the name might actually convey something more resembling fundamentalism, which is something we were condemning in the document. And so they considered the name to be unfortunate. I don't necessarily, and I totally sympathize with those arguments, and I don't consider the name to be perfect myself. But our purpose here was not necessarily to convey extreme orthodoxy so much as to convey orthodoxy coupled with the freedom to explore and to innovate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I really like what JMX was saying. And I agree with all of this so far, that there is this central paradox and tension. And I know, whenever you pick a name that is oxymoronic, you're going to have people who just think that you're, trying to be glib or silly or something. But we're serious about this idea of fruitful tension, and of finding in the conflict of paradoxes, a way forward. And I think that's always been part of the Latter-day Saint experience. We're looked at, and we are a very hierarchical, top-down institution with a theology of radical freedom, right? And so that's another one of these examples where you have this kind of this paradox, where we stress obedience and we stress agency. And I don't actually think they're contradictory at all. I think in that paradox of agency and obedience, like, you find another fruitful tension. So, like Jeffrey, I don't think that the name is perfect by any means, but I also think it's the best one that we could come up with from the 3 of us. And
I like the phrase or the term fruitful tension. I mean, obviously, that's like the fundamentals of creation, right? I mean, you have a fruitful tension there. I think, J. Max, you were the one I had read. You talked about the etymology, I think, of the term orthodoxy somewhere. I think it is interesting also that orthodoxy also would be, right? It would be doxy being the way, and orthos actually means correct or really straight, right? Actually straight. And so it brings them, for me, it brings to mind Isaiah 40, verse 3, right? Which is make his paths straight is really what orthodoxy kind of means. It's almost like a call to prepare the way, right, for this fruitful tension, maybe to come through and do something. But well, let's dip into it a little bit. I want to go through some phrases on this and have you guys expound a little bit more on I'd like you to think about what the intent is here. It looks to me like this was very well crafted. You took a lot of time to write this, and careful about the wording, I think, is probably something that was important to you guys. So let's go over this a little bit. One thing I see in this is, just kind of a whole parts whole on this is you've got this fruitful tension, as you say, Nathaniel, going here. But what I see here is a very difficult thing to chart, right? It seems to me like it's very difficult to chart this because you're talking about what you want to stay away from with a fundamentalism on one side and with a term that I want to talk about a little bit more about the unbridled progressivism on the other side, right? But where is that? Where do you go with that? And I see a lot of, well, anyway, we'll kind of go through that a little bit and see if we can chart that a little bit more. But you talk in the opening paragraph here that you want to reduce the fidelity to knee-jerk traditionalism and others to abandon fidelity for worldly philosophies. Are there specific worldly philosophies that you guys see right now that you think are threatening this idea of finding, for lack of a better term, this center place?
Well, absolutely. And just before we get into like what those specifics are, there's a reason that we didn't put the specifics in the manifesto itself, and that is that the manifesto expresses the principles, and the principles can have different applications as the kind of environment changes. So if we had led with here are the concrete specifics that we're concerned about, it would have been a point in time kind of document that would have immediately started to be dated and no longer as relevant from that point forward. So we've got the principles there, and then we can talk about how they apply today, but that might be different than how they're going to apply in 10 years or 20 years from now. So yeah, I think, there's definitely kind of a secular progressivism that is kind of the dominant culture in the West, especially among kind of the elite, for lack of a better word, college educated. And there's kind of a whole package of philosophical ideas that go with that in terms, was it moral therapeutic deism is one. I'll let Jeff weigh in on that a little bit more. But yeah, there's and this is broadly kind of associated with the left, identity politics, critical race theory. There's a whole lot of other kind of it's a nexus of ideas that seem linked. And one of the reasons that we felt compelled to work on this whole project is that we saw problems rising on the right as well. And I hate to generalize, but and there are caveats and people are more complicated, but I think we all kind of know what we're talking about when we use these general terms, and there are exceptions and there are nuances. But on the left, there's this kind of secular progressivism. And on the right, there's a kind of especially since 2016 with the rise of Trump, there's kind of an ethno-nationalism that you can see in the statistics and surveys as people are starting to view America less as a kind of a nation of ideals and more as a nation of a particular cultural heritage. Associated with specific language and specific historical roots. And so you're starting to get kind of a companion ideology on the right. And the two of them go together in tandem. They outrage each other, and you get this fighting back and forth. And they both view the other as the enemy, but they actually fuel each other. they depend on each other. The left and the right exist in this kind of cycle of mutual antagonism where they each get a whole bunch of outrage and energy from provoking and interacting with each other. So, yeah, and I'll let Jeff and J-Max add to that.
I did want to follow up on that, Nathaniel, on one thing. That's one thing I did question on this, is because you're talking about the principles you want to focus on. I wonder about the term progressive a little bit. It almost seems, you brought up, for example, critical race theory, but let's just go back to critical theory period and postmodern philosophy, that, these two things together that have kind of spawned this identity politics and new left that we're looking at here in the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, that has really taken control, especially of academia. Progressivism to me is a little bit more modern. It's a little bit focused on science and modern enlightenment and different things like that certainly do align themselves with secularism. I don't know. I think the threat to me has moved on a little bit from that. I mean, maybe you see that differently, but the threat to me has moved on a little bit more to more of an illiberal. I mean, this is on the left side, a little bit more of an illiberal ideology that is actually more postmodern than what we've usually looked at as progressivism.
I'll just weigh on that briefly, and just that we don't necessarily think, and this is a conversation we've had amongst ourselves, we don't necessarily think that all of our word choices here are perfect. This is a negotiated document, and going back, we might change some words now that we've seen the reactions of a large number of people and misinterpretations, willful or otherwise, of our message here. Because one of the things that we don't want to imply here is that political progressivism generally is our target here. I mean, we believe that there are a broad range of political worldviews that are perfectly compatible with the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Even if I disagree with them, I don't necessarily see anything in the three proclamations that would lead me to challenge a liberal Democrat's point of view on economics, for example, per se. And so we don't necessarily want to apply with the term progressivism that we're talking about political progressivism writ large. And that's one of the reasons why we caveated the term to unbridled progressivism. And we really meant that term largely in a theological sense. If you look up Christian progressivism online, you'll see, articulation of Christianity that centers on the historical Jesus coupled with an embrace of expressive individualism and various worldviews like that. And so in conversations both before we publish and after, I think we would want to clarify that we're not talking necessarily about a political worldview per se, even if there are certain political ideas that we might critique under this umbrella.
Okay. Anybody else want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll expand on it a little bit. I think going along with what Jeff was saying, at least when we were drafting this, in my mind, when we used the word progressivism, we were referring to the idea that we need to make progress within the church. So, there's this idea that there is the doctrine of the church, and then there's a church culture. I think that church culture often gets oversimplified, that people think that just because something is cultural, it can be dispensed with. And so progressivism here refers to wanting to make changes to the church, including possibly doctrinal changes, but at least behavioral and cultural changes. And as we've said in the document itself, we're not opposed to change, but it needs to be done, I guess the right word would be prudently, and with a mind toward the will of God and his servants, and not just to match whatever's going around in our broader culture. So that's kind of, and so that's where it ties together with the politics, right? Is a lot of times political ideas, the ones that Nathaniel mentioned, but also on the right, a lot of the ideas that are coming from some of these far right groups, they start to creep into the church with a mind toward changing the church. So, we take the political idea of identity politics or critical theory or even postmodernism, and we import it into the church and allow it to be the lens through which we read everything. Same thing happens on the right. You take some of these alt-right ideas. I don't want to say alt-right. That's the wrong phrase, because a lot of it's more adjacent to some of those conversations. But there are some scary ideas out there on the right, very nihilistic ideas that have been growing on the political side and that are also making inroads in the church. And so part of our goal was to refocus on the doctrine of the church itself and make that the lens through which we interpret everything else.
So you're saying that in a lot of cases, as we become more polarized, the polarization is the new political lens that we're trying to put everything through it, right? And it's beyond political. I mean, these things that we're looking at, to me, these are worldviews, right? This is a worldview, a view of reality, a view of civilization, and that's going up, as we might say, higher in our values hierarchy than what we're seeing with the actual gospel truths.
I just wanted to add one quick thought to that as well, and it's just simply that this is the clarification that I want to make about these two terms, fundamentalism and progressivism, that we use them. Is that fundamentalism we understood as this worldview that nothing can change. If the church is true, then the church, then our cultures, our institutional structures, our particular emphasis, whatever it is about the church right now, have to remain the same across time. That fundamentalism puts us in a straitjacket where change is a sign that is a sign of moral decay, for example, institutional decay. And progressivism, on the other end, which says that everything's up for grabs. In the name of social and moral progress, we can revisit and rethink literally everything about our doctrine, our culture, our traditions, our institutions, to the point where we don't have any anchor anymore. And so that's the theological sense in which we understood these terms. And I don't think we launched this document with the politics so much of it in mind, even though that there's certainly a political dimension to all of this. That wasn't the purpose for our use for those terms.
Yeah, and I think you're getting some of the diversity between the three of us right now as we're having this conversation, which is useful to point out. We all have our particular spins on this, and I kind of launched into the political immediately. What I'd say, just kind of, and I think this is pretty much in line with that, is fundamentalism is that you have to live with the status quo. And progressivism is not just, although I agree with Jeff, it's this idea that like everything is up for grabs. But I mean, we don't have to pretend that that's really what's happening, that like progressivism is just, oh, everything's up for grabs and it could be whatever, who knows? Like we all know when we refer to progressivism that there is a unified, fairly unified ideological approach that wants a certain set of changes in a certain direction to certain policies. So when we say progressivism, we're saying in general, that stuff over there, they have the right idea that we should change and grow and develop as a church, but their plan is not compatible with the restored gospel as we have it so far. So change is good, but that direction is not the right direction to go. On the other hand, on the fundamentalism side, those are guys that don't want to change at all, that think, and the real problem there isn't just the desire not to change, it's if you think the church doesn't need to change, and I mean the church as the people. When I'm saying church in this context, I'm referring to members. I'm not referring to our doctrine or our theology. If you think as a body, the saints are perfect and where we're already where we need to be, then that's a serious pride problem, because we're not. As people, as members, we have so much to learn and so much to grow. And what we want to do with Radical Orthodoxy is carve out space for faithful progress, for faithful change. And what that means is that you pay attention in General Conference and you see what the general authorities are talking about. You look at the things that are new, the topics that are changed, the things they say that are different, because there are subtle changes. That's the whole point of having general authorities, of having prophets, of having General Conference, is that they have things to say to us that are new, that do involve change in emphasis or direction or possible new understandings. And so we want to encourage flexibility and faithfulness towards that kind of change. So fundamentalism, my personal spin, means status quo. We're perfect already. And we're saying, no, that's not the right way. Progressivism refers to a specific suite of ideologies that are not compatible with the gospel as we've received it. And so change, but not in that direction. We want faithful change. And we think there's wide open territory to discuss that, to be open to that, to have our own kind of development of this is our understanding of core gospel concepts, as every generation kind of has to reinvent and redefend key principles. That doesn't mean they're changing. And also just especially being open to being led so that we can be receptive and listen.
Oh, and I'll add one quick comment to that, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, but to answer your original question about worldly ideas that are being supplanted, that some people supplant for gospel truth, and things that might include therapeutic deism, which Nathaniel brought up, the idea that God's love is completely indifferent to our lifestyles, that a loving God isn't going to ask us to do hard things, to make hard choices, to give up various desires and wants that we might have, or expressive individualism, which is the idea that our identity is defined by our unique desires and interests and passions, and that human flourishing is rooted in personal authenticity. For example, this idea of expressive individualism, which have their place, but I think they can come to overwhelm and overtake the scriptural understanding of discipleship. And then on the other hand, I think that there's plenty of room for change in our ministerial approach to members of the church who struggle. Like, for example, the LGBT population. I think there's plenty of room for growth to develop a soft-hearted approach, a gentle ministerial approach to addressing the unique situations of a broad number of Latter-day Saints in a variety of situations. And I think that in my conversations with fellow Latter-day Saints, sometimes the resistance to those sorts of changes, and I think that we can welcome those changes while at the same time maintaining our fidelity to truth. And I think that's what this is all about.
So we're looking at, trying to navigate all this. Imagine yourself, you're anchored, right, to specific gospel truths, but at the same time, we need a little bit of rope, right? Is that what you're saying? We want to stay anchored, but we need a little bit of rope to be able to make some changes and to move a little bit.
The purpose of life is growth. It's growth individually and it's growth as a community. So we, again, when I say we, I'm talking about us as members, personally and collectively as individuals, we have to grow. For me, and this isn't a piece that I wrote, but I haven't published yet. It should be coming out pretty soon. When I was serving my mission in Hungary, Elder Holland came and gave a talk, and he talked about D&C 29:30 through 32, which is where it talks about the Lord creating first spiritually and then temporally, and then temporally and then spiritually. So at the end, it was temporal and spiritual. And what Elder Holland told us is that verse 32 referred to the restoration, that the restoration took place temporally first, and then spiritually. And he said that meant that the institution was restored, the authority with the keys. That was taken care of by Joseph Smith. The temporal restoration is basically complete. But the spiritual restoration, he said, was ongoing. It wasn't complete yet. And it was our job, even 200 years later, to continue to work on that spiritual creation. And this isn't like one unique thing that I heard one time. If you just look at the General Conference most recently, you'll see the phrase ongoing restoration is used. So the restoration is not done. The restoration is ongoing. That means there's change. That means there's growth. That means there's development. And we want people to be flexible, open-hearted, and open-minded to that change. But like you said, without letting go of the anchor, without letting go of the foundation, without repudiating what has gone before, but building on top of it.
You'd said, Nathaniel, you especially hear it. You kept referring back to General Conference and to the brethren, right? And some of the talk out there right now, and I've read a number of the comments and a couple of other blog posts that have been put out there. The criticism is, and here's one specifically, I'm not going to say a name on it, but it specifically says, well, this is little more than question whatever you want so long as you agree with the brethren in the end. Right? That's basically what you guys have put together here, that you are, radical orthodoxy is we're going to agree with the brethren, and you can question everything as long as you end up agreeing with them in the end.
I don't think that's actually such a bad thing, though. When we say agree with the brethren don't put out like a detailed point-by-point list of how to live your life in every single particular. There are a few key truths that are taught in a unified voice by prophets, ancient and modern, and yeah, when it comes to those key truths, we're pretty unapologetic about embracing them. And I'm not ashamed of that, and I'm not embarrassed by that. I'm enthusiastic about that. But the idea that if you're going to embrace these relatively few truths wholeheartedly, that the thinking is done, what are you talking about? The thinking has just started. We've been given the raw materials. Now let's go to work, because there's so much left to do in terms of application, in terms of integration, in terms of understanding. I talked earlier about how we have a hierarchical church that has a huge emphasis on freedom and free will. This is how it works. We're given kind of a lattice, a structure of really core truths, like the divinity of Jesus Christ, like the fact that this is his church. We've got a couple of these bedrock, like the atonement. These are non-negotiable, right? But that doesn't mean that you have these truths and your life is done. That's just the raw material to live your life fully, and to grow and develop in understanding individually and collectively. So, I mean, guilty as charged, but I don't think it's such a bad thing.
Well, it's kind of interesting you brought up hierarchy a couple of times. That seems to be a point of attack oftentimes, is actually that hierarchical structure that's in place. Real quick, I used to be in the tech industry, and I went to San Francisco once, and I had we were in this big forum that was put together. We'd won some awards, and we were receiving those, but there was some breakout sessions, right? And one of them was, and it's still very popular. It hasn't really caught on very well because it really doesn't work. But one of the focuses of these breakout sessions was, we're going to run an organization with no hierarchy, right? We're going to flatten the hierarchy completely and have a completely linear organization and run this. And this was kind of this utopian idea of a we'll call it a coastal corporation that was going to work. And of course it doesn't work, right? There's no way that can work. But you bring up hierarchy, that you have this first point here in the Radical Orthodoxy, that your first bullet point is truth. And it says, we love and defend the truth. We reject philosophies that suggest that there is no truth, which is very postmodern right now. We recognize, however, that without divine assistance, truth is very difficult to discern. I couldn't agree with that more, right? There's so many times where you really have a sincere desire to know, how do I apply this in my life? Or how do I navigate all of these narratives and these political philosophies and social philosophies, and how do I find that? I don't always get it in an answer to prayer. And so tying yourself to that hierarchy, trying yourself to something that if you've built an anchor and a testimony based on a restoration and the keys of the prophet, for example, that does seem like a good thing to me. It in the end, sometimes that's got to be a rudder until you can kind of put something together that is more of an anchor that you've kind of individually absorbed, that you can place as something in part of your personal bedrock. It seems to me like that does need to be a rudder sometimes.
I'll add to that too, that I have two thoughts to share. And one is that the comment that you shared implies somehow that, looking to the brethren to set forth the boundaries and guidelines for our exploration is somehow like putting ourselves in the straitjacket. But when I study the teachings of church leaders, I don't see that at all, and nor do I see that nor is that how I think of this project. I think of this project as, we are launching a rocket, and we're defining the launch pad. We're defining where we're launching from. The teaching of the prophets and apostles are the launch pad, and there are many places we can go from there. And our goal is to explore an entire universe of possibilities that are made possible by that launch pad, and to imply that there's only a few possibilities, or that there's only a few possible destinations that we can end up with, while following with maximum integrity the teachings of the prophets, it's a little bit short-sighted, I think.
So, I mean, Radical Orthodoxy, I talked about it kind of being uncharted. It seems to me, because I've really gone through all this and kind of gone through these different articles and blog posts and some of your own comments on these things. And I see, you give up the example here you give the example of Homer with Odysseus, right? Where you're going to be going through Scylla on one side and Charybdis, I think I'm saying that right, on the other, which is oftentimes used as something like you're between a rock and a hard place, right? You need to avoid these two extremes, which is absolutely true. I mean, it's the unbridled progressivism, as you put it, of, let's just say, going too far away from the anchors. And the other one where you are in a straitjacket, you're putting yourself in a straitjacket, so to speak, tied directly to the anchor, so to speak, are both bad. They're both wrong. Neither one can work on this. But what I see in this, and yet I agree with everything you're saying on this. There are no real specifics as far as the specifics are what to avoid, right? But there's still, and let's just say we like to put this into political terms of the left and the right. I'm not sure how much that always applies here, but is the center where the truth is? Because is there really a center that you're looking for? I mean, we talk about, someone was saying here that, I'm going to say who it was, Patrick Mason, right? In the article in the Salt Lake Tribune, he says they, and I'm glad he said this, he said they care deeply about the Latter-day Saint community and fear any fracture, right? So the polarization. They want to hold the center. Is that where the truth is?
In terms of temperament, yes. There is a question of how do you relate to other people? How do you interact with other people? Elder Kieran just gave a talk, at Ensign College, where he specifically said avoid the extreme poles. But in terms of truth, and I'll let Jeff add more to this, not necessarily. It's not about like you can pinpoint the error on the left, you pinpoint the error on the right, you take the middle, and that's where you're going to find the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
It's avoid the left, avoid the right, and then go find the truth somewhere else, because it's not on that continuum. Is that what you'd agree with, Jeff?
Sorry, I'll jump in here since.
Yeah, J-Max, go ahead.
I agree. It's not about triangulation, right? It's not about orienting yourself based on where everyone else is toward the center. I don't think that it's even about a formula. That's a formula. I'd call it reducing morality into a formula based on taking measurements from the left and right and then just positioning and triangulating where you should be. That doesn't work. The gospel isn't about formulas. From my perspective, the gospel is about relationships. And the most important relationship is with Jesus Christ and with God the Father. And then secondarily, the relationship to covenants, the relationship to fellow Latter-day Saints, the relationship to families. And the truth, we get the truth. This goes back to what you were asking, that when we talk about the truth, we say, we recognize, however, that without divine assistance, truth is very difficult to discern. And so if you're trying to discern, go ahead.
No, I'll just say it is slippery. It really is. I mean, you'd think that it would be like easy, but the truth is slippery.
Yeah. Well, and that's, that concept that, in fact, the phrase that without divine assistance, truth is very difficult to discern, that was derived from a discourse given by Elder Christofferson a couple of years ago, and in which he said the same thing. And the point there is that you're not going to arrive at the truth without God. And Elder Christofferson's point, he said that, he talks to a lot of people, and one of the complaints they have is they say, well, you're saying that atheists can't be moral. And he said, not in the slightest. Of course they're moral. But he pointed out that their morality comes from conscience. It comes from something inherent, that spark of the divine that's within all of the human race, all of God's children. And so you can smother that truth, that feeling of truth. You can learn to not be able to sense it. But yeah, it's not about triangulation. And that's where the prophets become so important. I think Jeff wrote a very interesting article a while back where he talked about the value of the prophets as a check against our own propensity to I'm trying to think of the phrase used. Anyway, our own propensity to fool ourselves, essentially. We can get caught in these philosophies, these lenses, and everything makes sense. And we need the prophets. We need that concept of hierarchy and a concept of authority to check against our own worst tendencies and that tendency to fool ourselves. I'm probably slaughtering how you explained it, Jeff, but that's kind of what I got from it.
That's okay. So I'm actually going to come back to that in just a second, because I want to tackle the centrism issue, which is that that some have misinterpreted this precisely that way, where we're finding one extreme, finding the other, and trying to put ourselves in the middle, and that makes that casts this whole project as this exercise in posturing, and also if that's really what we were doing, it places us at the mercy of the extremes of the Overton window. Whoever controls the Overton window controls where we are, and that's not what we want, and that's not how we see this. And at least that's not how I see it. I see this as an exercise not in posturing, but in discernment, because there are errors on every side, and we want to acknowledge and identify those errors, and that's not always going to place us in the middle. And there's actually an article that I have outlined that associated with this project that'll probably be a few months before I actually finish it, where I refer to this, the making of straight and narrow ways, where anytime God gives us a directive, let's say like don't drink coffee, right? Well, that creates a numerous occasion for sin in many directions. One, you can ignore the commandment and drink coffee, or you could embrace the commandment hypocritically, or self-righteously, or judgmentally, or with extreme judgment towards others, for example. And the noticing that there's errors and distortions on every side doesn't necessarily mean the answers is some middle, per se. What we're trying to do is we're trying to turn our eyes to the teachings of Christ and to the teachings of his servants, and to follow those teachings with maximum fidelity, and being aware of distortions that can lead us one way or the other. That's kind of how I see it. And
Jeff, can I interject real quick?
Yeah.
Something there.
Absolutely.
Related to that idea, I think is we need to be aware that when you talk about those two monsters and Odysseus sailing in between them, the danger isn't just being pulled toward one or pulled toward the other. The danger is, in order to avoid the one, you overcorrect and end up going to the other. And so, that's what we're talking. That's what we don't want. We don't, in trying to position yourself in between. That's what you end up doing. You end up falling for that trap between the two monsters. The one of them scares you, or the one of them makes you concerned, and so you move too far over this way and get sucked into the whirlpool instead.
Yeah, you get a view that maybe they're both evil, but maybe one's a little lesser, right? One's
it also
a little
doesn't
lesser.
matter.
If I'm left, if I'm unbridled progressivism, well, that one over there is a little scarier, so I'm going to lean this way. And the opposite is, if I'm more fundamentalist, right, that one over there is a little bit scary. This is the lesser of the two evils.
Honestly, I don't think we even care which one's the lesser of the two evils. I mean, and I don't remember if it was Nathaniel or J-Max, but someone today in one of our group chats was saying that, hey, look, there's two snakes over here, there's one snake over there, right? The message is to avoid both, not to compare the two.
We get into so much trouble with people who are saying, there's false equivalency, or, their side is worse. Don't you see that that's the graver threat? And we're like, guys, we don't care. We're not sitting here trying to say which is worse. It doesn't matter. They're both bad. So we're not interested in false equivalency and saying they're equal. We're also not interested in ranking them and in saying which is worse. Even if we could rank them today, it might be different tomorrow. Like, the point is, don't avoid them both, and don't avoid them both to stay right in the middle. Avoid them both to pass between and go somewhere else. And even if let's say one is 3 times worse than the other, right? Well, let's assume that's true. It still damns us if we push against the one that's way worse and then we end up in the other. We're still just as damned.
J-Max, you had written a little bit about this, and you brought up the Chesterton's fence example. Will you go into that just a little bit and talk about that using, hey, we need to look at the fence, critique the fence, but does the fence need to be moved?
Yeah, I think I don't know how many people are familiar with Chesterton's fence. I read about it years ago, and sometimes I fall into the trap of assuming that everybody's heard about it.
Well, give us a quick little background on it.
Yeah. So G.K. Chesterton, in writing about his own orthodoxy within the Catholic Church, he talked about, he used the word progressivism as well, and he's talked about reforming, right? What different types of reformers, and specifically he refers to the one type of reformer who, and he talks about social institutions. But for the simplest example, he says a fence. You come across a fence that's blocking the road, and he says the imprudent reformer comes and says, "There's a fence here. It's blocking my way. This doesn't make any sense. I can't see any reason why this fence should be here. Let's tear it down." He says that the more wise of the reformers, and there's still a reformer, and I think that was an important point. They're both reformers, but the wiser of the reformers looks at the fence and says, well, this fence didn't come from nowhere. It didn't spring up by itself, and it wasn't likely constructed just by lunatics. And so we should look into what purpose it did serve when it was erected, what purpose it might still serve now. And then he says to the other reformer, he says, go and try to find that out. If you can explain to me the purpose of this fence, then and only then might I agree to let you tear it down. Maybe it no longer serves that purpose anymore. Maybe the original purpose was in fact stupid or wicked, or maybe it just needs to be changed slightly. Maybe it just needs to have a gate added. But that was the example of the fence. He's comparing that to social institutions, and I think it applies very well within our church. Clearly, Chesterton wasn't a member of our church. He was Catholic, and he probably considered us a terrible heresy. I don't think that's relevant to the fact that the imagery that he's using is very pertinent to what we're talking about as well. That often, from a progressive side, people want to reform the church in all kinds of ways, but it's very haphazard. It's very imprudent. They come at it and just say, hey, this is blocking my way. I don't like that. Let's remove it. When really it takes a much more careful, circumspect approach when you're dealing with things that are traditional, when you're dealing with things that were created by other people long ago. And I have a bias toward this anyway. I love ancient literature, Chaucer, Beowulf, all the way up through Shakespeare and Milton. And so I admittedly have a bias for things that have existed and that are traditional and that are old. But at the same time, there's a reason why they exist, and they can't just be dispensed with without thinking about why that is.
Is there that makes me think about the whole idea in Malachi, for example, of oftentimes, the term, and I'm going to butcher this, but basically, the hearts of the children will turn to the fathers, and the hearts of the fathers will turn to the children. We usually think about that as ceilings and temple work, and I don't think that's all that means. I think that what you're really looking at there, like you're saying about the fence and about things that are ancient and our forefathers and going way back, we need to give them their due, don't we? I mean, it's like, I want to turn my heart back to them, and I'm in a different world. I see things differently, very scientific, and I've got a lot more information than they did, but I don't know. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I think you have to be careful.
That idea, that concept is not just a matter of having to do with temple work. That has to do with, I need to reach back and see them for who they were in their time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. At the same time, there is danger. I mean, the Book of Mormon has a very strong theme about wicked traditions that are passed down from our fathers. Tradition is a powerful thing, and it works both ways. You can have traditions that are good and ennobling, and you have traditions that are bad and should be dispensed with. And it's not always easy to tell which are which. I think Chesterton's fence isn't saying that there aren't wicked traditions that may need to be revised. I mean, President Nelson has very clearly called us out on addressing racism, even among memberships of the church and within ourselves, there are traditions in our own culture, even in our own Latter-day Saint culture, that need to be dispensed with and reformed. But they shouldn't be reformed, they need to be reformed with care. Chesterton said, I don't remember exactly where he said this, but it was related to the fence analogy, that it's kind of like considering all of your ancestors as having a vote, that what they did is kind of a vote. It's, if you're on a topic and they voted in a certain way, it's not just the people alive now, but you should look back at history and see how they voted and what they considered us. And maybe they were wrong, but you shouldn't assume that they're wrong.
I do think you're right though, Greg, about the traditions and turning the hearts of the fathers to the children. The Book of Mormon, there's often a bad rap for the bad traditions, and we hear about those a lot. But there's also the good traditions, and kind of some of the crises in the Book of Mormon were when the good traditions were failed to be passed on. So just like JMX is saying, there's both sides of the coin. You've got to be willing to discard or repudiate those traditions that are bad, but you can't just passively assume that the good traditions are going to get passed on their own. And to my mind, because JMX likes ancient literature and I like science fiction, so I'm a little bit more forward oriented. And what I'm seeing is, how can we make sure that we revitalize, reinvigorate the traditions that we have inherited from our pioneer ancestors? I don't actually have very many pioneer ancestors, but culturally we do. How can we take the traditions that we've received from our fathers and make sure that we're passing them on to our children? And so there is that kind of chain where it's both backwards looking and it's always forward looking as well, because we need to make sure that we take the traditions we've received, we do our best to kind of vet them, to scrutinize them for things that need to be removed or improved, and also to take the things that are good and not just assume, well, I saw that it was good, so everyone will obviously see that it's good. But we need to defend them and to praise them and to explain and interpret and contextualize them so that the next generation has a fair shot at continuing their journey of passing the traditions on, the good ones.
Yeah, when Nathaniel first approached me with this concept to talk about writing this, I remember he talked to me very specifically about how throughout the Book of Mormon, we see this pattern of the next generation not understanding, not believing, not having received the gospel and internalized it. And then it causes all kinds of problems. And so, and that was something that Nathaniel said to me when we first started on this endeavor, that I thought was really true and that we wanted to accomplish with this is it is important to bequeath the good and the righteous and the truth that you have received, righteousness and truth that you have received, to the next generation. But that's difficult because the next generation is dealing, and as I see this with my own kids, they're dealing with problems that were unimaginable when I was their age. So the application of those truths, if we try to fall back and do it the exact same way we did it in our generation, it's going to fall flat. And that requires listening to, like Nathaniel mentioned, the little hints and the directions that you see in General Conference and in the words of the prophets. And it requires doing the things necessary to have the Spirit with you so that you can know how to change what you're doing to meet the needs of the new generation.
I'll just add just briefly to that, is that, like, going back to what Nathaniel was saying about Chesterton's fence, I kind of see it as avoiding the fallacy of presentism, assuming that everyone who has gone before are somehow moral idiots and we are superior, more enlightened, and so forth, and therefore we can dispense with all of their structures without any fear of consequence. And I think that sort of presentist attitude is mistaken. But at the same time, when we read the Book of Mormon, I see a story of innovation. I see a story of constant change. And in one of the posts that I published, and related to Radical Orthodoxy, I explore how each generation of saints in the Book of Mormon found themselves with entirely new problems to grapple with, and entirely new innovations in response to them. And that's why we look at President Nelson and his invitation to take our vitamins and to prepare for dramatic changes in the church. And I think that we're just seeing the beginning of this. And I suspect that 50 years from now, when I am something like 85 years old, the church is going to look very, very, very different than it does today. certainly there'll be common themes. Certainly there'll be things that carry through, but it's also going to look very different. And I need to be okay with that if I am going to continue this walk in this covenant path that I've made, that I'm walking.
Well, you can always carry your presentism from your early life all the way through to the end of your life. Your old presentism, I suppose you could end up doing. So that's true. I was going to say also, though, I both for J-Max and Nathaniel, I can see a lot of Beowulf and Star Wars too, though. I mean, a lot of those are the same stories to some degree.
That's fair, but if you're going to get me to nerd out, I'm going to have to say Star Wars isn't science fiction; it's space fantasy. So
okay.
Which is why it's similar to Beowulf.
Semantics. Okay, Jeff, this is an interesting thing to me. This is not something I expected when I had gone through this, but you had written about this, and you guys have already brought this up a little bit. Nathaniel, I think you did that. What you're looking at here with this is as far as apologetics, as far as LDS scholarship. I don't know what you're trying to build a large tent, right? Where you're getting rid of some of the conflict, or at least the polarization. And you talk about these, you'd written in here, Jeff, on your Latter-day Saint philosopher about the three tent poles that would hold this up. And it's kind of interesting to me. You bring up basically the three proclamations as kind of the focus point of this radical orthodoxy, that it's these very modern proclamations. You didn't go to the Book of Mormon. You're not going to the Bible. But you're going to these proclamations from the brethren on, and it's saying that, look, if we can agree on these three things, then that's a place for us to be, like you said, explore everything else and go into other areas that really need to go into. What brought you guys to this idea, or Jeff, or however you guys collaborated on this, to look at these three proclamations as kind of the tent poles of this tent you're trying to build?
Well, my first comment here, and this may not be a direct answer to your question, but I have seen a couple of people comment in response to the manifesto, well, why isn't it the standard works? And honestly, that's a totally fair critique, because truthfully, the standard works are foundational to everything. And so if I had to go back and reframe it, I would probably put the ground beneath the tent as the standard works, because that's what we're all building on. The scriptures, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, the Old and New Testament. We're not, nothing in this should imply that we're somehow straying from those foundational books, so to speak. But at the same time, I have friends who will literally tell me that I'm a heretic for saying that I believe in a local flood rather than a global flood. And that's the kind of flexibility that at least I wanted to write into this whole project, where you don't have to believe that the Book of Jonah is a literal history. Maybe the Book of Jonah is a parable, as some believe. Maybe the flood was local. There's a whole world of different takes on, and different conclusions you can arrive at through various exegetical strategies from the standard works that can lead to people to slightly different conclusions. And we wanted to create some space for that disagreement, while at the same time, how should I say, reducing suspicion that somehow, because someone disagrees on the nature of Noah's flood, that they are somehow and agitating against core church teachings, which I often see a lot in some corners of LDS scholarship.
That would take away a number of the polarization, issues of polarization. Certainly, if you're focused on those three things, I can see that. Things that really aren't focused on eternal truths, and whether it's because a lot of times as I do a Come Follow Me podcast, and a lot of the comments that I get, because I not center, but I try to stay away from literalism too much, right? And I don't mean Ben Spackman's literalism, but yet I don't want to go too far away from certain things. But I do see certain things as parables, and so I'll get a lot of response, and sometimes pretty heated, about things like, well, wait a minute, that's literal, or no, how can you possibly think that that's literal? And I'm thinking, okay, well, it's a good debate. It's a good thing to talk about, but these aren't really eternal truths that we're discussing.
Right. That's exactly right. Like whatever we happen to believe about, I'll use Noah's flood as an example because that's a safe example for me. I don't feel like I'm going to ruffle too many feathers with that one. Whatever you happen to believe with that one, we can still be unified in following the fierce moral witness of modern prophets and apostles. We can still be unified in embracing the central narrative of Scripture of creation, fall, and redemption through Christ, and so forth. And those core things, which we feel are captured in the three proclamations, those core narratives, that's where we can find that unity, while allowing some more breadth and flexibility and more nimble-mindedness is a term I like to use. Faithful, being both faithful and loyal, and also nimble-minded with respect to the details.
Yeah,
I mean, there's
let me add
also
to that real quick. Oh, sorry, Nathaniel, do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, because I'll be quick.
Yeah,
I'm going to go first. There's a sense in which we didn't pick these. Like, the point is we're taking our lead from the prophets. The proclamations are the things that they chose to elevate to this level of importance, and we're trying to follow their lead. That was it.
Yeah, and I'll add to what both of you have said in saying that if you look at what the words of the proclamations are, I mean, when you want to talk about, well, why didn't we make the Book of Mormon the tentpole? Well, the proclamation about the restoration of the fullness of the gospel has a whole paragraph about the Book of Mormon. It has, paragraphs about the priesthood, about Peter, James, and John restoring the Melchizedek priesthood. So there's so much that's subsumed in those three documents. It covers a broad range of foundational doctrines of the church. And the other thing I wanted to add is to what Jeff was saying. Part of the reason, so I want to go back. He talks about the flood, and I know plenty of people who would disagree with him about it being a safe topic. And not because, mostly because they look at modern prophets who have made statements about the flood in one way or another, or interpreted portions of the pearl great price in one way or another. The pearl great price mentions the earth being baptized, and so that they insist that therefore the entire earth had to be immersed because baptism is by immersion.
Joseph
Smith. Yeah, exactly. So when you've got those kind of comments, people say, well, how can you say that you are honoring, sustaining, and following the prophets when you are saying that Joseph Fielding Smith in this particular instance may have been wrong in that particular fact? Well, we're in the case of our approach that I don't think was explicitly spelled out, but was hinted at in multiple places in our document. We've really embraced the teaching that President Nelson, Elder Oaks, Elder Anderson, Elder Christofferson have emphasized in the last, I want to say, 5 or so years. And that is this idea that not only do we have a hierarchy where a prophet is above, a normal member of the church as far as interpreting the scriptures, but that doctrine is identified in those things that are repeated and shared among multiple members of the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 over time. So something that's been taught repeatedly carries more weight than the individual proclamation of a fact by an individual prophet or apostle. So you look at Joseph Fielding Smith, absolutely a prophet of God. I have no doubt about that. But there are plenty of other apostles who haven't insisted that there was a worldwide flood. So I take that statement as weighing less than something like the proclamation on the family or the proclamation on the restoration of the fullness of the gospel. That is a joint proclamation by all 15 members of the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12. So we do have a little bit more of a complex way of evaluating that, but we have derived that specifically from statements from Elder Oaks, President Nelson, Elder Anderson, Elder Christofferson, who have emphasized that that's how the doctrine in the church is defined.
And I just want to add, just for safekeeping here, that like I have no beef with people who disagree with me on these matters. In fact, that's in some ways the point of our project, is that I don't see someone as less faithful or because they disagree on some details, or because I think they're mistaken in some respects, in some regards, or because they think I am mistaken or disagree with me on some aspect. And our hope was that this by treating these proclamations of the three temples, we could essentially reduce that kind of contention. We could reduce that kind of mutual suspicion, while at the same time acknowledging the weightier matters that we all need to be unified on. The core doctrines, the fierce moral witness of our prophets and apostles. And Nathaniel said they're the ones who chose to release joint statements signed by the 15 of them, treating these issues as of paramount importance. And so that's what we're trying to do.
So the three proclamations, basically, right? You know, the proclamation on the family, the living Christ, proclamation on the restoration. Those are kind of interesting also to choose, because I think that they're kind of the modern, the contemporary guides, right, to where we might see polarization. And we certainly see that with the proclamation on the family, right? I mean, that is a lightning rod now in the church. It didn't used to be, but that is a lightning rod in the church where, you know, for example, I saw some reaction to what you guys put in, and with some people that they're very hurt because it's exclusionary, so to speak. And basically what they're saying is you're agreeing with the proclamation on the family, therefore you don't believe in sealing for certain people and for certain types of unions. And so using those as a guide is going to be a little treacherous, isn't it?
So precisely because they're so controversial, I think people bring a lot of assumptions to the table. And there's a sense in which the proclamation in the family in particular kind of, for some people, can act as like a political football, for lack of a better word. It's like a rallying cry. And so if you say, I support the proclamation on the family, a lot of people are going to assume a whole lot of additional assumptions that go beyond that. And some of those might be accurate and some of those might not be. So I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, there's going to be controversy, and figuring out how to interpret those, you know, can be a whole conversation or a whole series of conversations in and of itself. But our intent isn't to stipulate like the technical correct interpretation of the proclamations, or to kind of come up with a catechism based on the proclamations that breaks it down and says this is exactly what they mean. Ours is to say we believe that you have to accept them in good faith, in your best honest understanding of what the prophets and apostles meant when they wrote those words. And that does leave room for ambiguity, and I think that's a feature, not a bug. Especially with the proclamation on the family, and not just on LGBTQ issues, but also on gender roles and things like that. It's not like the proclamation explains itself fully and we're all done and we don't need to talk about this anymore. There is still stuff to talk about. So our intent isn't, hey, we have the perfect interpretation, we know exactly what these mean, and you have to agree with us perfectly. It's, here are the principles that the brethren have outlined. They've said these are really important, and they've given us these guidelines. In order to participate in radical orthodoxy, you need to accept those in general terms, and, you know, and sincerely, not just kind of saying that you do in order to, you know, score points so that you can then argue against them from the inside, but humbly and sincerely accept them and work with them with the understanding that, yeah, there is some ambiguity, and we might get additional clarifications, we might get additional changes down the road. That's perfectly possible.
Well, if a trend of that continues, I would imagine, looking at the principles and narratives of the Book of Mormon as you go through that we're probably going to see the same thing with the other two proclamations.
Well, the proclamation of the family wasn't controversial when it was written. And so I think a lot of people, not very controversial. And so I think a lot of people, you know, when the new proclamation was announced and then it was the restoration, I think there were some people who thought, well, this doesn't really say that much. And I'm like, well, wait 10 years. That's kind of the point of prophets, right? They get there ahead of time. So yeah, I think that there definitely will also be controversy, and we're not going to use the ambiguity, which does exist, as an excuse to fail to defend and believe in those proclamations. We're sincere in our acceptance of them.
And I think it's very possible that 20 years from now, that the proclamation of the restoration is just as controversial as the proclamation of the family is now. I mean, I could definitely see some clouds on the horizon in that regards, where, you know, the foundations of the restoration might be called into question in ways unprecedented in prior decades, in prior generations of the church. I think that's very possible. And ultimately too, that by making the proclamation of the temple, it was not our intention to make them the focal point of the conversation per se. Like I see this as the launch pad. These are the launch pad from which we want to launch into a whole universe to explore. I'm working on a blog series and perhaps a eventual book on embodied cognition that had nothing to do with the three temples, but I think is an example, potentially an exemplary example of radical orthodoxy in action. We want. I think our hope is by treating at least in the general sense the proclamations as settled issues, we can move past them onto better things, so to speak.
Okay. Where are we at today with what we've been talking about, putting this into context and dropping it into LDS apologetics and LDS scholarship?
I want to make a quick response to that, and that is that I don't necessarily think that what we've done here is all that new, to be honest. I think people have been doing radical orthodoxy for a very long time, and I've actually spent a few hours today putting together a list of articles written over the course of the past 2 or 3 decades, even of people saying essentially what we've been saying people have been saying it all along. Say that the people who signed their signature to this manifesto have been already doing this, and so I don't necessarily know that they're good. As far as the future is concerned, there's lots of things that we want to do. There's lots of places we want to take this, but I don't necessarily know that that the future is going to look all that different from the past, in the sense that all the people who put their names on this have already been doing this. I think they're just going to continue doing what they're already doing.
I want to add to that a little bit and answer your question. And I'm trying to think of a gentle way to say this, and I don't know if there is one. I think there's a real sense in which the intellectual class of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has failed us. Obviously, I don't mean everybody. We have great people on our signatories list who are absolutely at the top of, the Mormon intellectual class, and they're doing great faith promoting work. We have additional people who didn't sign who also are absolutely great. And we have people, so there are definitely many notable exceptions. But I'm not a professional academic, and JMAX is not a professional academic. And, we're getting some response already from, the professional academics in the Mormon studies community, kind of like, what are you kids up to? Like, what are you doing? And I don't want to pick fights with anybody. I really and sincerely don't. But they've kind of let us down in terms of walking that tightrope between academic rigor, which is important. Integrity is absolutely essential, and faithfulness. Because I don't even know if it's an open secret. I think it's just an open non-secret that the vast majority of PhD holding professional academics in the Latter-day Saint community are in opposition in varying degrees of openness to the brethren on the issues which they think are most important. So I absolutely agree with what Jeffrey just said, that people have been doing this work for a long time, but that doesn't mean that our contribution doesn't change things. What we're hoping to do is draw more attention to this work, draw and rally more people, including kind of non-academics like myself and JMAX. We both write, and we do our best, but we have day jobs. And also including kind of a younger generation of Latter-day Saints who will be scholars in the future, to kind of pick up the slack for where our intellectual classes has let us as a church down. I think this is a rallying cry to kind of change that, and because we have every expectation as inheritors of the Restoration for a rich and a vibrant intellectual and artistic tradition. And we've got room to improve there. And so I hope that's what we change, is that we take the best examples of the work, like Jeffrey's going through. We're going to have like a great list of examples of kind of what we're talking about. And it's not all new and revolutionary, but it is a minority voice, and it shouldn't be a minority voice anymore. It should be the majority voice.
I'll give one example here. I remember, back, I think it was in 1976, Elder Neil A. Maxwell gave a talk to Latter-day Saint social scientists, and he challenged Latter-day Saint social scientists to be more of a bridge between their discipline and the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. He challenged them and said that our citizenship should be in Zion and our passport in Babylon. And as academics, we need to be anchored in restored truth, and we need to view our discipline through the lens of restored truth rather than the other way around. And he also said that we can do this. We can become thoroughly bilingual. We can speak the language of academia when we can be as rigorous as the and embrace the highest standards of scholarship, and yet we can also still be true to the core moral witness of prophets and apostles, and we can still be true to the teachings of the Restoration. And I know a number of Latter-day Saint academics who've taken up who've taken up that challenge. A handful of them are on our signatories list. Ralph Hancock, Ed Gant, Richard Williams, and others who have, in some instances, specifically in response to Elder Maxwell's challenge, have decided to explore social sciences and psychology through the lens of the restored gospel, and they've done tremendous work there. At the same time, as Nathaniel said, they've been surprisingly alone at times. And it's been a lonely walk because far more of their colleagues than they wanted to have decided that they want to engage in their discipline and their academic pursuits in ways that are entirely indistinguishable from their secular peers, in broad outlook and perspective. And Elder Maxwell in his sermon specifically called that out, saying that one challenge we must avoid is the temptation to engage in our work in a way that is indistinguishable from our secular peers.
Well,
and
Jeff, the thing is, though, I mean, I really do appreciate what you're saying there, but it seems to me that especially, I mean, you can see the changes that have happened in academia over the last 20 years, especially 20, 30 years, right? You have a very homogenous group now that didn't used to be as much that way. I've always thought that education should lean a little bit left. Right. I've always thought that because I think that you want a little bit of that liberalness to go out and create and explore and, a little bit more rope. Right. But you've gotten now to a point where what is it? 92 or 94% of all PhDs are going to be on one side of the political spectrum.
Especially if they're not in the hard sciences. You can still
especially if they're not in the hard sciences. If you're in the humanities, it's probably 98%, if maybe 99. But the problem there that I see is, those ivory towers are almost all in Babylon at this point. And I'm just wondering how does BYU move forward, for example? I see this where it seems to me that, and I'm going to bring up, I'm going to get in trouble with some people on this, but the Maxwell Institute, which I really revere, right? And they've got some great scholars and they do some incredible work. And I read almost everything that comes out from there. It's marvelous, marvelous stuff. But what I see there is, to be in the world, but not of the world is a very difficult thing. To be in academia, but not of academia, it's almost impossible. It seems to me. You are reading national publications. You are speaking the exact same jargon. You're bringing on the same narratives and philosophies. That's very, very hard. I kind of see it like, in some ways I see it's a little bit like you're the State Department, right? You represent the United States, so to speak, but you're very much trying to make these bridges. And that's what you should do, right? You should be doing that and putting these olive branches out to interfaith communities and out to other academics, and that should be done. But is that really a way is that going to work going forward? Am I just being pessimistic about this?
So I'm going to let Jeffrey talk too, I promise, because he does know more than me about this. But the one thing I want to say is that, again, I think the radical orthodoxy emphasis on positivity is really, really vital here. Because you're absolutely right that it is very, very, very difficult to navigate those complexities. And I also want to add that academic communities tend to be very kind of small and insular, and they're human social communities. And so there's some impatience, from the outside. Why don't, the brethren just go in and tear it all down and start firing people and make these kind of really aggressive, negative in the sense of penalizing changes to restore things. And the brethren don't seem to want to do that. And I think it's because they understand that it's really about growing an ecosystem. And you can't just go into a garden with a flamethrower and expect that at the end of the day, you're going to have a healthy garden. Flamethrowers are not the way to tackle weeds. So I think and hope and have optimism that the real call that we as, with the Radical Orthodoxy Manifesto are trying to put out there is positivity. Is we need more good examples. We need more people doing good work. There are already a number doing absolutely exceptional work, and we just need to emphasize that. What can we improve? What can get better? And resist the temptation to get angry, settle scores, have grievances, and kind of try to fix the problem by
I just want to
things.
clarify. So I don't think that there should be a flamethrower thrown in there at all.
I was illustrating. I wasn't attributing that to you.
Yeah,
But
I just want
there are some louder, angrier
term.
voices.
I mean, my favorite
that's
scholars are actually with Maxwell Institute, but
yeah, mine too.
I'm just saying, it's hard for me to see an end point on this where it doesn't, where I don't know. I mean, I'm going to try and adopt your positivity here, Nathaniel, and hopefully absorb that a little bit more. But I'm concerned about it. It looks like it's the ideology that is spreading through academia right now is very rigid, and I just it's hard for me to see how that's going to work. I don't know.
Well,
go ahead, Jeff.
So I was just going to say that, I know for a fact that it's possible to do this sort of scholarship and to do it well, because I've seen it done many times. And I could point to a number of role models who have made a career out of exploring the implications of the Restoration in their academic discipline, and done so with remarkable fidelity and with remarkable rigor. So it is possible. But you're also absolutely right that the incentives in academia are tilted against those sorts of endeavors. And so I think that ultimately, I don't see this changing. I don't see, for example, I don't know if the stories coming out of BYU are sensationalized or overstated or not. I have no idea. I don't want to draw any conclusions there. But if there do need to be changes made, I see that I don't see them happening immediately. I see it more like growing a garden or planting an orchard. More like, I think that I suspect that the endeavors undertaken right now to cultivate a community of scholars who take the Restoration seriously, and is more like planting trees or planting seeds that bear fruit 20, 30 years from now, so to speak. And so I do think that brethren take the long game on this. They have a vision, not just for 5, 10 years from now, but 30, 40, 50 years from now. And that patience is part of that game. But I also do know that this is possible. And I think our goal is to help this process by pointing to positive examples of people who do it right. I also want to add to all this too that there are some shrill voices in the mix in all these conversations that, to some extent, did contribute to our project here. I know of voices who regularly attack, for example, the Maxwell Institute, treating the Maxwell Institute as some sort of enclave of apostasy, treating their latest Book of Mormon series as some chock full of heresies and so forth. And
it's fantastic, actually.
What was that?
It's fantastic, actually.
Yeah, I know exactly. But I know people who say those sorts of things, and some of those voices are part of what prompted this entire project. Because yes, I have concerns. JMax has concerns. Nathaniel has concerns. We've all seen stories coming out of BYU that cause us some concern, but we also have concern with the intemperate voices, for example, that might just be making matters worse. And so our call for radical orthodoxy is to say, look, we can embrace, faithfulness without moving to those extremes, without becoming one of those shrill voices, for example, that just makes it even harder for the brethren to do what they need to do.
Let me end on this here. Looking at our situation right now, and again, from politics to the church, they seem to be conflating now quite a bit. Your last bullet point here in Radical Orthodoxy in this manifesto is on charity. It says, we love all of God's children and we cultivate a soft-hearted temperament that rejects the spirit of contention toward those with different views, even while we vigorously defend the truth. This is a difficult environment that we are in terms of polarization and the vehicles that are now available through social media, especially, to keep us polarized and to congregate and basically to preach to the choir and to virtue signal and et cetera, et cetera. as a parting message here, and what you've written here, what do we do to combat this? I mean, you've talked about avoiding the two sides. That's true, but how do young people especially avoid those two sides and put the teachings of the Savior above everything as the filter over a feeling of belonging, over a feeling of partisanship and of ites, right, and factions?
I mean, I think that's an incredibly important question. I think in some ways the answer is simple, and people like complicated, innovative answers. But in this case, the answer is to live the gospel. And the emphasis here is on everything from the basics, prayer, scriptures, go to church, and especially service. We spend an awful lot of time in social media environments where everybody is talking about national level politics and few people are paying attention to what's happening in their neighborhood. And I'm not saying anything new when I point that out. But if you can focus on learning to understand and love your coworkers, coworkers are great because you don't pick them for the most part, which is the same way that you don't pick the people in your ward for the most part. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is kind of unique in the fact that which congregation you go to depends on your address, not your proclivities or your desires or whatever. And so it just kind of throws you in the mix with random people, and you got to learn to love them. Yeah, it happens at work too, for the most part. You're kind of in a random mix. You got to learn to love people. So work on that. Learn to love the people that you actually interact with, even if it's, on Zoom these days. And don't underestimate the miraculous power of doing the basics. The greatest influence on my life, as far as the whole radical orthodoxy thing in the past ever, has been going through and reading every single general conference talk ever written. Work in progress, not done yet. That's pretty basic. But just the discipline of going through and doing it has completely changed the way I look at the gospel, changed the way I look at the church. And I wouldn't have been involved in this project if I hadn't been doing that. So there are little practices that we're told to do all the time, and I think sometimes we overlook them. So stop it. Read your Book of Mormon every day and practice serving and loving the people that you work with or that are in your neighborhood or in your ward. It's basic, but I honestly 100% believe it. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, Nathaniel knows that I've done a similar thing. That I started with the year of my birth. And I started reading every single general conference talk that was given from the time I was born until the present. I am not complete yet. And sometimes my enthusiasm for the project wanes a little bit. But in general, it has been life-changing to read the words of the prophets in my lifetime and to see how consistent they have been in their messages. There's this idea that they're all over the place and that they disagree with each other. But it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. There is a doctrine of the church that is taught over time that you see over and over again. And there's safety in recognizing that and having allegiance to it. And the only way you get that is by doing those little things. The other thing that I'll mention is that I really think having charity has a lot to do with valuing other people. So I served a Spanish-speaking mission, and I remember one time it occurred to me that charity in Spanish is caridad, which also can be interpreted in some ways as expensiveness. It's very expensive. It's caro, mm-hmm. And I think there's value in learning to see people as everyone as expensive, as highly valuable, regardless of what they think or believe or even what they do. They could be in the depths of all kinds of depravity, and they are still an expensive jewel to our Heavenly Father. And if we can keep that in mind, it helps a lot. And staying close to the Spirit's going to help. I honestly don't believe that you can maintain charity for other people without having the Spirit. I think it's a spiritual gift, and you will lose it if you lose the Spirit. So that's kind of, and I know that seems really generic, but I think that's the truth.
Jeff, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say that I think that I've been thinking about this a lot lately. You have to question, how do we stay anchored, right? Particularly this highly polarized world, right? That where we're constantly being drawn and pulled in various directions. I see, for example, I saw a metaphor used online and social media, so referring to good Latter-day Saints being pulled out to sea by ideological and political riptides, so to speak. And how do we keep that from happening? And I honestly think that it really comes down to time. Where do we spend our time? And I think that if you, for example, spend 2 or 3 hours a day listening to talk radio, and 10 minutes a day reading the scriptures, like that which we give the most time to is the image that we're going to take on ourselves. And so and what that means is that maybe we can't or shouldn't listen to every podcast. Maybe that means that we shouldn't read every book. Maybe that means we shouldn't watch every sitcom. Maybe we need to be selective about where we spend our time and making sure that we're giving the most time to divine sources, prayer, scriptures, general conference, and other contexts in which we can seek guidance and revelation from God. Because if we spend the bulk of our time in other endeavors, that's what's going to influence our worldview the most. And so that's one of the key aspects, I think, to all of this. And the other is and I really appreciate the insights from the Arbinger Institute, Terry Warner, the distinction between having a heart at war versus having a heart at peace. And I feel like so often there's this temptation to set our hearts at war. Everybody wants our hearts to set at war. Everybody has a target. Everybody has someone they want us to hate, or some group they want us to hate, for example, or have contempt for, or in some way or another. And truthfully, I think that relinquishing the war, the call to be a disciple of Jesus Christ is not a call to be a culture warrior. It is a call to defend the truths of the gospel. It's even a call to defend the proclamation of the family, but that's not the same thing as becoming a culture warrior. It's not the same thing as setting our hearts at war with, the team progmo or team whatever, right? It's a call to set our hearts on Christ and to become ministers for Christ in every context. And I think, I don't remember whether the Nathaniel or J-Max, I also think this means sometimes turning off the national news, turning off the blogs, turning off the social media, and going and ministering to our neighbors. Because honestly, I think that personal ministry to our neighbors, personal ministry in our ward and our family, that's what's going to keep us rooted more than anything else.
Yeah, I'll follow up with Jeff. Jeff was probably thinking of me, and I know Nathaniel has tried this out once at least. I try to do a social media fast, a 7-day social media fast every month. I start it with my fast Sunday fast, and then I keep it going for that entire week. And I delete the apps. I delete Facebook and Twitter from my phone, and I close the tabs in my browser, and I do not look at it. I do not touch it for 7 days every month. And it has been a huge benefit to me. I really do think social media is wreaking havoc with the brains of people in general and the members of the church. And at the same time, we've seen from the brethren that social media is a valuable tool for spreading the gospel. And the missionaries during this pandemic have used, I have a daughter who's on a mission right now, and Facebook is the primary tool she uses for contacting new people. So I don't think it's appropriate to say, let's abandon social media altogether. But I do think the concept of a fast is extremely valuable.
It's good advice. Any final words on radical orthodoxy for the audience?
We're not claiming that we are the only way or the best way to be disciples of Christ. We hope that it helps people who are affected by this polarization, interested in ideas and intellectual pursuits. And so we really hope that population will be interested and will participate and will get excited. But I just want to, again, be clear that we're not saying that we're indispensable. We're not saying that this is the true way to be a Latter-day Saint. We're trying to be humble about our mission, which is, we're an alternate voice. And President Oaks talked about that a long time ago and talks about alternate voices that are bad, but specifically said a lot of alternate voices to the church are Latter-day Saints who are just trying to fulfill the command to not wait to be commanded in all things, but to go and do things on our own volition. So that's our contribution. We mean it in a spirit of positivity, constructivism, and, just this is us trying to help build the kingdom of God. We think it'll help a lot of people, but we're not claiming any authority, certainly. We're not even claiming to be indispensable or needed in this hour, but we hope we can be helpful.
I'll add my thoughts, which are simply that we have a very diverse group of signatories, and we hope that as time goes on, our supporters will become even more diverse. And we're not striving for to be some sort of ideological or monolithically ideological group by any means. I think that we hope for a broad diversity of worldviews, broad diversity of perspectives, with those shared commitments to the core teachings of the church. And on top of that, I would say that we're not trying to, some people have accused us of trying to steady the ark, trying to put our hand up to steady, the institutional church. And we don't see that way at all. What we're trying to do, we see ourselves as trying to connect many like-minded people together who are interested in this project of exploring the implications and ramifications of the restoration and everything that we do. And we're also trying our very best to be incredibly sensitive and responsive to guidance from divinely authorized sources, from the scriptures and from modern prophets and apostles. And so every general conference, every BYU devotional, anytime those authorized servants of God speak, we are going to be listening, and we're going to be trying to adjust course accordingly, because we're not here to try to override or supplant or anything like that. We're here to try to respond to their lead.
Yeah, I guess my final thing, and I don't really feel like I'm really the person who should be giving the last word on this, but I'll just refer to the blog post that I wrote. The word radical comes from root words, etymologically, meaning root. And I really do feel like what we're grasping at here is to care about the roots, the deep roots that are in the gospel. I think a lot of times we're focusing on the leaves, and the restoration is amazing, and the gospel of Jesus Christ is amazing, and it has deep roots that have the power to affect our lives in all kinds of unexpected and exciting ways. And so I see radical orthodoxy as a call to be excited about the gospel in intellectual ways, to be excited about exploring what it means in our lives, and to be inspired, both in the sense of having the Spirit within us inspired, but also in the sense of feeling that sense of awe and reverence for God and his creation and the gospel he's given to us. And that's where, when we didn't, this isn't about us. It's about we see the gospel in amazing ways, and we want everybody else to be excited about it, about faithfulness and about the prophets and about the complexity and the simplicity all messed up into that thing that we call radical orthodoxy, that seems contradictory, but is the source of everything we have. So anyway, I love the concept. I've really enjoyed working with Jeff and Nathaniel. They've been great. They've definitely pushed back on some of my ideas, and as I've pushed back on them, and together we've created something that I hope will inspire others to be faithful.
And I just wanted to add like 1-2 sentence last remark, and I hope J Mac doesn't mind it, but I honestly think that the real focus of all this is Christ. We are and this is where the virtues of the manifesto come from. We want to take upon ourselves the image of Christ and to become like him, and that's where we got those virtues from. We're thinking of how can we, in the pursuit of these endeavors, model Christian living and model the Savior. And I think that's where, if there's one last word on radical orthodoxy, it would simply be that we want to point people to the Savior, because that's what really matters.
Well, my 2 cents last on this is just, I really appreciate you guys and what you're doing. It's not just what you've written here and what you're presenting, and yes, it's been presented before, but it's that you're those alternate voices. And I think that that's important. It's the exact same reason I'm doing what I'm doing. right, is, listening to what Elder Christensen said, Elder Oaks, President Oaks, and Elder Holland, right, that have talked about this. And I think it's really important to have these voices that go out there that are not, in one sense, tied directly to saying, this is the church doctrine, but at the same time are out to try and point people to Christ and doing their best. At least that's their intent, right? And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing as well. Jeffrey Thayne, Nathaniel Givens, and J. Max Wilson, really appreciate you guys. For the audience, look up Radical Orthodoxy and each of these individuals, and I think you're going to like what you see. Thanks so much.